So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Josh Drill, who is an adjunct associate professor of psychiatry and human behavior and associate director of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at the UCI Irvine Institute for Memory Impairments and Neurologic Disorders, NINDS-CTMC. His current research is focused on clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease. He was a co-I at the Network for Excellence in Neuroscience Clinical Trials Network, NeuroNext at UCLA. And he is Director of Education at UCI Mine, which is home to one of 29 Alzheimer's disease research centers, which are funded by the National Institute on Aging. Without further ado, and he is a fellow former resident of the great state of Ohio.
Yes, it's always tricky to be a Buckeye in Ann Arbor. Just be careful who finds out that you're a Buckeye fan. Thank you, Will. It's very fun to be here this week. I don't know if Chris Coffey in his introduction used the clinical trials camp line, but always looking back to the trials camp. Well, I'm going to try. Can you guys hear me okay with this microphone? So, better, worse? I'll speak up. So what I'm going to try to do in the next 45 minutes is, if I need to convince you that recruitment and retention are important in the concept of clinical trials. The other thing that I think you've heard over and over again so far this week that is certainly true for recruitment and retention is that you really need to start early when you're thinking about this aspect too of your clinical trial. So I'm pretty straightforward agenda. I'm going to talk about why these things are important, and I'm going to work through some basic ideas, observations, and recommendations around both recruitment and retention. So you may not know that the majority of clinical trials fail to meet their recruitment goals. Why is this important? Of course, slow recruitment is associated with increased cost, but it can actually hurt your science too. At the least, you're delaying the rate at which you're answering your scientific question and being able to move on to the next question, which may be the next phase of development, or it may be that you need to move on to the next intervention option. At the worst, slow recruitment can actually harm internal validity and it can raise concerns about your results and their generalizability. There are some really interesting papers that speak to this. I'm not going to go into too much depth about internal validity, but Jesse proposed on Ioannidis, and I would encourage you to look at this really extensive collection of papers, reanalyzing and assessing trends across the HIV trials that were done. Much of the support for this statement comes from those papers. To operationalize this a little bit, this is one sort of meta-analysis is a strong term, but a review of Alzheimer's disease clinical trials where we simply wanted to see how many trials successfully enrolled one patient per site per month. And as you can see, the majority of trials that we examined failed to meet this minimum standard, and the peaks that you see are unique and interesting examples of cases that, for one reason or another, might be that the trials conducted only in Eastern Europe on treatment-naive patients and failed to be replicated, had exceedingly high rates of recruitment. Similarly, in the acute neurological setting, this is a review of stroke trials. We see a similar trend. Very few studies achieving just one participant per month per site. The mean across these trials was less than 0.8 participants per site per month. The other thing that was really quite interesting about this meta-analysis is that they examined trends over time. And though the total number of trial participants and the duration to complete the trial weren't altered over time, the number of centers that needed to be included in order to achieve that consistency was significantly increased over time. So it suggests that actually getting worse at recruitment and not others. And I think it's important to point out that these things actually have an ethical implication as well. Trials that don't recruit the full sample are, by definition, likely to be underpowered unless you have a greater than expected drug effect. So you really are running the risk of putting participants in harm's way, at risk for drug adverse events or procedural adverse events without the benefit of knowledge. And Roger said earlier today that bad science is unethical, and science that fails to recruit is similarly bad science and therefore unethical. So I'm going to walk through some basic observations and design choices and other recommendations about thinking about recruitment and retention and maximizing the probability that your study will succeed in recruitment. And certainly that means starting early. When I was part of the Neuronext, I was honored to be a part of the Recruitment and Retention Committee, where we reviewed protocols at various stages of development or implementation. And one of the things that we observed is that there was always an opportunity to improve. And that not every investigator, even some very senior and experienced folks, have thought about this to the full capacity that it often requires. For example, we would see really great, elaborate recruitment plans and essentially no attention paid to retention of trial participants. So start early, and I think the other thing that we've heard today, and we've heard multiple times this week, is to take it from a different perspective. Think about what it would be like for one of your patients and or their family members to consider being in this trial. And think about whether that's something that you would do, or you would want your child or grandparents to do. Think about who you're going to enroll carefully. Inclusion and exclusion criteria are obviously important. There are a number of guidelines that are in the literature for how we should design our trials, inclusion and exclusion criteria. Of course, we want to enroll patients who truly suffer from the disease that we intend to study, and there are increasing opportunities to be confident in cases like Alzheimer's disease that you're enrolling the right people. But you also want to enroll people who are the most likely to benefit from your intervention of choice. Well, the competing interest is to enroll people who are going to generalize to the larger disease suffering population. And I think the other competing interest for all of these things is whether there are going to be enough patients who meet those criteria when you get done designing your study to be able to actually enroll and be able to do your overarching study. So if you're very focused on people who only take a particular drug, or you're very focused on people who don't take any drugs, are there going to be enough patients in your clinic or in other clinics to actually recruit to successfully achieve approval for your trial? And how we define these things, again, can impact our science. So this is a review of MS trials, and it looked at two 10-year ethics whereby the criteria for MS relapses changed. And so instead of the previous criteria of 2 relapses over the last 2 years, there was a movement toward using criteria by which a patient had to have 1 relapse in the previous year. And it sounds like a pretty straightforward thing. It was born out of the desire to intervene earlier in disease, but it had an implication to the science of trials. So what's shown here is the relapse rate in the active arms of the prospective studies based on these changes in criteria. And so what you see is that the trials themselves have a reduction in the number of relapses, which would be a logical choice of endpoint to reduce the number of relapses. But your opportunity to do that was reduced. Your statistical power was reduced because of the change in inclusion criteria. So I'm I'm not saying this was a right or wrong decision, only that the decisions we make when we're designing our trial have a potential to impact our ability to answer the question. Similarly, in that same meta-analysis of stroke trials, in addition to showing that recruitment was increasingly or decreasingly efficient, that the success of recruitment in these trials was very closely correlated to the inclusion and exclusion criteria that a trial was applying. In this case, it was the longer the time from the actual stroke, the more likely the trial was to recruit successfully, and whether or not mild strokes were included in the study. Now, obviously, this has potential implications to the scientific question that's being asked, and produces, again, this competing interest that you really have to strike a very delicate and careful balance. And again, I think that one important aspect, and we've heard it again throughout the week, and Erica was talking about it today, is to think about this from the perspective of the patients. And doing focus groups of patient populations and families is a great way to learn about how likely they are going to be willing to do the types of things that you're going to ask them to do in your study. But short of having the opportunity to do that, go to the literature. Here I'm showing you 3 different examples of studies around willingness to participate in trials for Parkinson's disease, for hypertension, and some of our data from Alzheimer's prevention trials. And I'm not going to belabor these things, especially because I think that they are really largely consistent, that people choose to participate in trials for 3 reasons, not mutually exclusive, as represented by the Venn diagram here. They want to help mankind, they want to help scientists, they want to see medicine improve. They absolutely want to benefit from participating in the study. And they have to trust you or whoever the investigator is that's performing this study. One term that I always like to mention is conditional altruism. People participate in trials because they do want to help, but if you ask someone if they'll be in a trial where there's absolutely no possibility that they will benefit in any way, they are unlikely to enroll. There are exceptions to that. There are some incredibly altruistic people in the world. But I think when you're considering who's going to be in your study, you have to think about what's in it for them. And if there's nothing in it for them, they're not likely to participate. The flip side to this is to consider why people are unlikely to participate. Are there reasons that people are going to say no to being in your trial? These are the results from the same 3 studies. I'm not sure it's even the best example. I should have probably picked some other ones. For example, multiple sclerosis, when we're trying to recruit young adult women with the disease who have busy families and children with soccer practice and things like that. It's probably a different set of barriers to the 65 to 85-year-old person that I need to recruit for an Alzheimer's disease trial. So I really think that it's different. The barriers are different for the different therapeutic areas. And while it's easy for me to put my Venn diagram up for why people participate, I don't think it's the same case for the barriers to enrolling and recruiting to your trial. And all the more reason for you to investigate as thoroughly as possible, at the very minimum of tackling the literature, what challenges you are likely to encounter. And another aspect of understanding people's approach to this decision is critically who is actually making that decision. So this is one of my all-time favorite figures from a paper. It comes from Jason Carlos, who's a friend and colleague of mine at Penn, where he examined who makes the decision to participate in an Alzheimer's disease clinical trial over the course of Alzheimer's disease. So it looks kind of complicated, it's really not. Basically, each of the different symbols represents categorization of who makes the decision. So for the blue circles, it's the patient making the decision. For the blue triangles, it's the patient and the caregiver in partnership. In the green squares, it's the caregiver, but the patient still has a role. And in the diamonds, which I think stands out, The red diamonds is the caregiver makes the decision on their own. So when a patient's MMSE is 30, they are in the very, very mild stages of Alzheimer's dementia. The caregiver rarely makes that decision on their own, and the patient always has a role. But as the disease progresses, we see an increased focus on the caregiver's role of making the decision whether to participate in the trial. So I don't think, with maybe two exceptions, there's not a lot of dementia researchers in the group this year, but critical for your therapeutic area is to understand this decision-making process, not only including facilitators and barriers to enrollment, but also who should you be targeting as you think about maximizing your recruitment? Who is the key decision maker in that trial participation decision? So some very straightforward things can be considered. How can we minimize the burden on the patients that we want to participate in our trial? Is there an opportunity to reduce the number of visits, the manner in which we conduct those visits? Can we do telephone reports as opposed to in-person reports? David Sprecher from Utah has a really nice paper on how telemedicine visits can be utilized to increase people's willingness to participate in Parkinson's disease trials. You might have to enroll the patient at the elite academic medical center, but can you do remote visits thereafter, thereby increasing the geographic region that you can recruit from, because people who have to drive further distances will be willing to do it when they have a limited number of visits in the ivory tower. The flip side to this is the FDA going to be okay with that? And in the NEURO-NEXT-MS trial, there was a plan to do telephone safety visits, and the FDA sort of nixed the idea, and so they had to move to in-person visits to appease the FDA. So again, case by case, you have to think about what's going to work best for your study. Jason Karlowicz, again, has another nice study using a conjoint method. This is a method common to market research, where he wanted to look at the utility of different factors in a trial design to see which would have the greatest impact on caregivers of Alzheimer's patients' willingness to be in a trial. And what you see here is that offering things like home visits and car services really neutralize each other, so there's no added benefit to having both of those things. Obviously, having a high-risk drug decreases people's willingness, which proves the method. But can you factor in decisions like this? Can you do studies to better understand which aspect of trial design will have the greatest impact on people's willingness to be in your study? And the other thing that's interesting in this study was that Jason showed that increasing the probability of receiving active drug increased caregivers' willingness to enroll in the trial, though not as much as offering a car service or the opportunity to do visits at home. And this alternate allocation is something that we see frequently in trial designs as a means to increase people's willingness to enroll. Of course, it assumes that people are enrolling because they hope to gain access to a beneficial therapy, which I think 9 times out of 10 is a safe assumption, although I've had some people in my study say I want to participate if I knew I could get placebo. Sort of harkens to Roger's slide, I think. In any event, we do see a number of trials that, in an effort to facilitate recruitment, will implement an alternate allocation by various factors. Sometimes that's scientifically necessary if you want to test multiple doses, for example. But sometimes in a trial that otherwise could be designed in a 1-to-1 ratio, we do see investigators utilize this. This paper from Steve Edlund's group at UCSD does a very nice job of modeling these requirements and shows that your recruitment rate has to actually increase by 4 or 12%, depending on your alternate allocation strategy, to actually make it worthwhile from a total time to complete your trial as a strategy to maximize recruitment. They went on to explore the cost of these things because, of course, by increasing your randomization to increase the likelihood of receiving active drug, you therefore have to increase your total sample size for your trial, which has increased costs associated with it. And you need to actually increase the recruitment rate even more substantially to reach a cost benefit, as much as 37% in a trial uses a 2-to-1 enrollment strategy. So these are not always easy decisions from the standpoint of a slam dunk that your strategy will actually increase your recruitment time for the sake of answering your question more quickly. It's also the case that this could, again, have implication on the scientific question you're asking. So this is a really neat paper, meta-analysis of dopamine agonist trials, looking only at the active treatment arms from 28 different PD trials. So the only data in this slide is from people who got a dopamine agonist. The two groups are based on whether the trial in which patients got the dopamine agonist was 1-to-1 randomization or alternate allocation such that patients were more likely to receive drug. So they got the same drug, but they were in 2 different trial designs. And what this analysis showed is that people who were in a trial that used alternate allocation, people who were in a trial who rightfully were expecting a greater probability of getting active drug, did better on the UPDRS than did people in a 1-to-1 randomization trial. So the authors of this called this the placebo effect. The idea that if you think you have a greater risk of getting placebo, you may not benefit as much, or you benefit less placebo as a product of being in the study. You could say that Parkinson's disease is the ideal scenario to see effects like this, but can this happen in your study? Worth considering, I think. Other straightforward recommendations, are you going to rescreen people in your study? Once someone's screen fails one time, are you going to allow them to be screened again? In a number of trials, we see very high rates of acceptance or meeting inclusion-exclusion criteria of people who are permitted to rescreen. So it's also something you should really think about. I love this paper from Will. Last year, it's looking at the number of times individuals are enrolled in a trial, in a single trial. This was, if I remember correctly, an acute care setting status epilepticus trial, actually pre-acute, yeah, in the ambulance.
Dr. Silverwhite was the principal.
Very good. This was individuals who were enrolled multiple times in the same trial, and then it's coded based on whether they received active treatment or placebo and whether they responded to that active treatment or placebo.
It was 2 actives. It was midazolam versus lorazepam. So
Oh, sorry.
Since it was seizures in the ambulance, you have to give them something.
Got it. You don't want me to be your emergency room physician.
Well, I mean, although I tell the residents in the emergency department, like, do not give them Ativan if they've only been seizing for 5 seconds, because invariably, by the time you're done pushing the Ativan, their seizure stopped, and then they're sleeping for the next 2 hours, and you can't send them home. So it's like, let's let the seizure play out for,
60 seconds.
Okay. I also don't want you to be mine. What's important about this slide, I think, while it's fascinating to me that this happens at all, the primary analytic strategy for this paper was pre-specified to include only the first time a person was enrolled in this trial, which is incredible foresight. So what else can we do to impact people's decision about whether to be in a trial? Can or should we offer incentives? This is not an ethics lecture, so I'm not going to belabor the ethics of offering incentives. I'll say that I think we can and we should offer incentives to people for being in trials. These are some data that empirically assess the ethical quandary of offering incentives. This is from Scott Halpern at Penn. And he showed that the financial value of the incentive did not systematically change people's risk tolerance for being in a study, though it did change their willingness. The more money we pay people, the more willing they were to be in a study, but their willingness was still directly correlated to the risk associated with being in the trial. He also did a really impressive study where he randomized physicians to receiving a $5 or a $10 financial incentive for completing a survey, a study, and showed that though the $10 incentive increased the response rate, that the $5 incentive was actually the greatest cost benefit. So the $10 incentive increased response rate, but not by enough to be more cost beneficial than was a $5 incentive. Based on these results alone, I recently put $2 bills in a survey that I sent to all of our participants in our Alzheimer's Center. I think it's really important to say that when we're talking about incentives, again, you really want to think about this from the perspective of the patients you want to enroll. And so these are some data that we published in the last year, where financial incentives were actually the least effective incentive that we examined when pursuing a study of barriers to participation in Alzheimer's prevention trials. So I personally think that we should strive to make research cost neutral for participants, but we really want to think about the participants not as patients, but as the most important members of the research team, and try to treat them in such a capacity. And so what people in our study told us is that the thing they would value most, far more than getting a payment, was to learn about the study. And we're all in a position to promise that we will share aggregate results of our trial, but the question then becomes, can we go any further? And I think the further we go, the greater the impact we'll have on people's decision making. So the top things in our study that people told us would incentivize them to participate were the return of personal cognitive test results and the return of personal genetic test results. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you should do these things. They add challenges to your trial. You have to worry about things like stereotype threat. If we tell someone that their memory is getting a little worse, it's going to make their memory get worse still. If we tell someone that they carry a risk gene for Alzheimer's disease, is it going to make their performance on memory tests worse? And then there are logistical barriers to these things too. If you're doing genetic tests, you probably are sending them to your colleague down the hall to analyze genes, and it may not be a CLIA certified lab, etc. But I do think it's really critical to try to think about what kinds of things we can do to make participants feel truly engaged in the research and not just like a patient who comes in for whatever processes and procedure you intend to do as part of your program. Okay. Obviously, no matter what we do to make the decision as favorable for us, i.e. likely for people to participate, only people who are aware of this opportunity will then choose to be in your trial. And overwhelmingly, most trials enroll patients from the principal investigator's list. And I picked one paper to articulate that point. I have horror stories, if you will, of working in an Alzheimer's center, and if my colleague was working on a trial with me, they would refer to that trial. If they weren't an investigator on that trial, they didn't refer to the trial. Staying top of mind is obviously critical. You want to increase referrals from your clinician colleagues, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. I think there are a number of ways to try to enhance physician referrals. There's a literature on this. We've tried things like circles of excellence, making clinicians feel like they're affiliated with our center in some way. I think the extent to which we can take it out of the hands of the docs, or at least also try to target patients and advocacy groups as well, you're more likely to reap benefits. This includes having very well-crafted materials that can be distributed, left in offices, etc. Capitalizing on things like social media and the internet. In some cases, advertising may be a way to go. But I also think that we're at an interesting time where patient advocacy groups and patients themselves are having a meaningful impact on the way we do science. And the more you can capitalize on those things and engage with those organizations and groups yourself, the more likely you will be to succeed. Technology is also, I think Will's an author of this paper as well. Will Muir is a good model. He's got like 20 papers in the last year, and many of them are really interesting papers about the ways we do trials. So I think he's the next John Ioannidis. This is a paper looking at how the electronic medical record can be drilled into to identify potential participants. And in this study, they looked at, I think, 2 6-month periods. They looked at how frequently the clinical staff identified and referred potential participants to a trial versus an automated system that was assessing criteria in the EMR. And Will may want to take it from here, but if I remember correctly, it was a substantial increase of 17 versus 0 patients who were identified for recruitment to a trial by the electronic algorithm-based metric versus the human clinical staff metric. I think EMRs are the way of the future. There's cohort building tools that many academic medical centers now have in place, like I2B2. You have to work with your IRB to figure out how to do this at your institution, because it's certainly not universal at this point. But at the very least, you can query your medical record to see how many patients are going to meet your approximate entry criteria for a trial. You can ask the IRB for permission to then communicate with their physician so that they know your trial is happening. Send a blinded letter or flyer about your study. And in some cases, you can actually ask for their contact information so that you can prospectively attempt to recruit them. I do think brochures are worth making, and I think you should think about it. I don't think it's as simple as one Word doc that has the study title, your name is PI, and the IE criteria, and at the bottom how much you're going to pay for. I think you can go further. I think you can apply behavioral economics, frankly. I hope a paper was just sent around or is in the box now on the behavioral economics of recruiting to trials. What can you do to make people really want to be in your study? Make it legible, make it easy to understand. These things are obvious, but can you add color? Can you add illustrations, photos? Can you do things to really engage the viewer? This is a flyer from the NeuroNext trial of spinal muscular atrophy and the super baby concept that was introduced for recruiting people to this very important, very challenging condition and clinical trial. And this trial did succeed in successfully recruiting its population, which was, I think, no small feat. It was 25 SMA babies and 25 normal controls who would have blood tests and other aspects of being in the trial. So think about who your target is, and think about a little market research to try to craft a brochure that will do as much as possible. Think too about how to use those brochures. I'm a big fan of capitalizing on the incredible people who participate in our trials. And I find that they often provide a more compelling message to be in the study than I can. So at the very least, when I go out in public, I like to bring one of them with me if they're open to that and say why they chose to be in the study and their experiences in the study. But they also can do things like deliver your brochures to their support groups or to their clinician who diagnosed them in the community somewhere, et cetera, et cetera. And then, again, in this modern time, can we go further than paper brochures? The NeuroNext myasthenia gravis study has some really beautiful brochures that are available online and I think available through the NeuroNext website to be observed. They use animation to explain what myasthenia gravis is. I really like these ones where you watch someone draw in a way that no human being can possibly do in a one-take setting, but they're very, I think, compelling. And there's one on the trial that sort of works you through slides that are being sketched out by this Sesame Street-like lay-friendly approach. There's also those UPS commercials from a few years ago with the brown board that I think were also quite successful. And then another strategy that I implement with great frequency is rather than advertising, we try very hard to get stories in the local media about our studies. And most media outlets will not want to do a study on your trial. They don't care who you are or how advanced your science is. They certainly don't care if you're using an adaptive design, although all of us in this room do. But they care about our people. And so when I changed institutions 18 months ago, UC Irvine had one participant in the anti-amyloid and asymptomatic Alzheimer's disease trial, or A4 study. This is her. Her name is Paula Hunter, as you can see. And I immediately worked with media relations, and we got a story on the cover of the Orange County Register about this time last year. It generated about 120 calls to our center. We brought 80 people in for information sessions. We screened 55 to 60 of those, and our enrollment increased by 900% in the 6 months after this story. Going from 1 to 10, I could have left that out, but it's still a meaningful difference. I think using registries is critical, and it's also a timely topic. We're seeing more and more registries pop up. They exist in a variety of mechanisms and modalities. Vanderbilt CTSA has Research Match, which has very limited information. In contrast, I always have local registries where we try to collect self-reported diagnostic, drug, interest, and other various things to help us do a prioritized recruitment. Registries work best when you're only contacting people who are likely to be eligible for your study and likely to say yes to it. But there are a number of registries out there. You may have a registry that's good for you. It may be for people with your specific diagnosis or therapeutic area. Or there may be other registries that might contain people, and you want to simply make sure as many people as possible know about your study. When I gave this talk 2 years ago, I had the slide on registries, and I said to myself, wow, I didn't go to the Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative registry for my ongoing study. So I went home and got 10 subjects within a week for a study that we were doing by accessing a registry that I hadn't thought of until I told people how silly it is not to approach as many registries as possible. I think the other thing about registries that's really critical is that the point of a registry is to have a bolus of people who can be approached about a study immediately. So rather than a serial recruitment through clinical or community outreach basis, whereby you're going to find one patient at a time over months, or maybe one patient every other month based on the data we saw earlier, can you identify 10, 20, 50, or 100 people who might be eligible for your study who you can contact and bring in to screen immediately? And the aforementioned John Ioannidis has a really nice paper where they looked at how early recruitment predicts ultimate success. And what you see is that they categorize studies based on whether they had very rapid, moderate, or slow initial recruitment, that is the first 3 months of a trial. And trials that had very rapid startup to recruitment were overwhelmingly more likely to succeed in completing accrual for that study. And it gets worse from there. So again, something that we've talked about today already, minority participation. This paper was actually mentioned already from Jim Burke here at Michigan, showing the quite low rates of minority race and ethnicity participants in NINDS-sponsored clinical trials. It actually looks worse for this in Alzheimer's disease trials sponsored by NIH, and far worse in Alzheimer's disease trials sponsored by the industry. We had a great talk about this. I thought that talk was excellent. The only things I want to add are that I think, Sam, we're going to put a paper today in the box from O and colleagues at UCSF that have a really nice paper about how we should approach minority recruitment in the setting of clinical trials. This is a very hard thing, and you have to think about when you're writing your grant and writing your protocol what goal you're going to set for yourself for diverse recruitment. And in the grant setting especially, I would urge you to think about making sure you budget appropriately. Minority recruitment is a very challenging aspect of what we do. It's extremely important, but very challenging. And so the more we budget appropriately, and you heard, there are a lot of things in the literature that have compelling evidence to show that an intervention can increase minority participation. The few that do have evidence are to have staff who look like and can speak the language of the people you intend to try to recruit. To have staff who can actually go out and be in the community, and to yourself have a presence in that community. And I did research in Los Angeles for 7 or 8 years, put a lot of effort into having a reputation in diverse communities as an effort toward our recruitment. And I can tell you, this is not an easy fix. So the more you can get into the community and the more you can be satisfied with delayed rather than immediate gratification, the better. But I think the paper that we're going to circulate by the group at UCSF speaks to not only the importance of this topic, but also the importance of planning. We have a paper under review right now that I did put in the slides where we're looking at African Americans' willingness to be in Alzheimer's prevention trials. And I'll leave the results aside and just tell you that the #1 source of African American participants for our study was an African American community liaison who had lost her dad to Alzheimer's disease, wrote a book about it, and would go to beauty parlors, and barbershops, and senior centers and say, you should be in this study because it's important. So give a lot of thought to what your goal is, how you're justifying that goal, and how you plan to achieve it, and cover the costs that will inherently be associated with trying to do that. So what do you do if none of this stuff is working? What do you do if you have your trial up and running and you've designed it as well as you can, and yet you're still struggling to recruit? So I think the more you can try to understand what challenges you're encountering, especially in the setting of multi-site trials. Do you have one site that's really doing poorly and one site that's really knocking it out of the park? I would want to talk to both of those. I'd want to understand what barriers are being encountered, and I'd want to understand what's working well at that other place. Can you set up a call with all the coordinators and all the site PIs for them to tell others what's working well for them? Do you need to change the protocol? Are there not enough patients who are meeting the eligibility criteria? Are you having a 90% screen failure rate? What do you need to address in order to get your scientific question answered? Briefly, I'll transition now to thinking about, you recruited your entire sample. You really must keep them. Recruiting is only half the battle or less. A trial that has greater than expected dropout is also unethical for the same reasons as a trial that fails to recruit. You end up underpowered and may not answer your scientific question. This is from our same assessment of a bunch of AD trials. Most AD trials are designed with power calculations that expect a 20% dropout. And here I've sort of color-coded the stoplight of trials that are in danger of ending up underpowered because of greater than expected dropout. In neurodegenerative conditions, especially where we're trying to examine whether a drug has disease-delaying properties, we run other risks if we have not only greater than expected dropout, but skewed dropout towards a particular arm of our study. This is from a commentary in neurology a few years ago. It assumes a last observation carried forward analysis, or LOCF. In this course, I used to make the joke that in this room, LOCF is a 4-letter word. I don't anymore because it always gives the same reaction you just gave me, so that's why I stopped using that joke. But the point here is that if you have skewed dropout such that your intervention is actually causing adverse events and people are dropping out because of that, you could inappropriately conclude that the drug is actually working to slow the course of the disease because people dropped out while they were milder and their data were carried forward to an end of study outcome. I think it's also critical to understand who is at increased risk to actually drop out and to think about how to design your trial with this in mind. We have a paper where we looked at predictors of dropout in Alzheimer's disease clinical trials, and we found that who the caregiver was, who the primary informant or study partner for Alzheimer's patients, was highly associated with their risk of dropping out of the trial and providing incomplete data. So again, in your disease category, are there certain factors that will make people at risk for dropping out? So in your protocol, I think you really want to factor in your mind the patient perspective and what the burden on them will be in order to complete your study. I think you want to do your best if you have a multi-site trial to ensure that you are implementing in your protocol aspects of good retention that can thereby mandate all the other sites to practice these things. I think your role as PI is a unique one. I think you can offer up newsletters and other types of engagement for participants. If it's a single site study, that means going to the visits and making sure you see someone at every single visit they have for your clinical trial. If it's a multi-site study, it may be letters that you write as the protocol PI to these most valuable members of your research team, the participants, and make them know how much you value and how critical their contribution is to your scientific pursuit of improving care for people in their position. The more you can show gratitude, the better. So handwritten thank you notes go a long way. Other token gifts, and I was saying to Jeff Saber, who has an awesome paper on trial acronyms, that this course should really offer a workshop on crafting your trial acronym. Anyway, if you have an acronym, or when you have an acronym, think about tchotchkes that you can create that will make people feel like you really appreciate the contribution they're making, and offer that, and potentially offer things on a regular basis throughout the trial. Don't do it all at baseline visit. Make people feel appreciated as they come back for subsequent visits. Similar if you're offering financial incentives, I would strongly recommend you space them out over the course of the trial. Again, now, modern age of technology, can you be texting and tweeting people? Can you tell people how you're doing in accrual? Can you send a congratulatory note to everyone in the trial when you achieve full accrual and know that 12, 18, or 24 months from now, we're going to have the answer to a scientific question. And in closing, again, harking back to the SMA trial, this was a really, I thought, ingenious recruitment and retention tool. These were onesies for the super babies who participated in the first Neuronext trial and then 101 in SMA. I thought it was novel, innovative, and worked. And then if that's not enough, it creates these opportunities for protocol investigators to wear capes at meetings with other people. So I went on slightly over. I apologize for that. In summary, I hope I have convinced you that thinking about recruitment and retention is important. I think you can be scientific in your approach to recruitment and retention, and I think you must. I think you have to put great effort into planning recruitment and retention because it is consistently one of the greatest challenges we face in trying to move our science forward. And I think that treating patients and family members not as patients but as members of the research team is a tremendous first step in planning an appropriate recruitment and retention plan. Thanks very much.
I have a question. With the getting the lady on the news,
Yeah.
how did you approach that from like the IRB or privacy perspective?
So at the UC, and I have experience on two campuses, it's not an IRB issue. It's media relations has in place a consent form that is PAN studies, and it's a media consent that any research participant can sign, and it's in place. Admittedly, in 2009, 2010, I was a site investigator for the ADCS trial of nerve growth factor gene transfer. And we had one of the first participants. This is a neurosurgical intervention directly injected into the nucleus basalis minor. And we got one of our participants on the front page of the Los Angeles Times on the 4th of July. Did not help recruitment at all. That's a separate story. But I also got my hand slapped by the IRB because the participant had signed a consent form to be on the CBS Evening News and not in the LA Times. And thankfully, issues like that wrist slap that I received led to greater discussion about this, how silly it was that the person was really signing a consent saying they were willing to disclose their identity in the popular media for the purpose of helping recruit to the trial. So I think for now it's a case by case on an institutional level, but I would just talk to your IRB office and your media relations office if you have one about whether such procedures are already in place.
And I guess a key distinction was if you shot a commercial, the IRB would want to review the commercial you shot. Because
Absolutely.
That's a promotional material.
So
here, this is an individual who is, you're not controlling the media. The media is talking to her about her story.
I think that's highly accurate. You know, I think if you have an advertisement, the IRB wants to see it and approve it. You know, we're putting together these small 1-minute videos now talking about our registry and trials, and we have to write that script out, even though I just want to film them on my iPhone and post them on the web. The script still has to go to the IRB.
So if it's an IH funded, especially an INDS funded, you have to run it by the media office, like an INDS, you know, area number. The person that's currently and has been charged for many years, she's very appropriate, but, you know, if we find out about something on TV and we didn't know about it, then she, you know, did a rough job. Very more or less another strategy on the paper, you know, in our group, she can publish that and the insurance will as a result. But instead they wanted the data out to the next trial in order to find out how this something is doing. And I had to register the code, and then he actually told me that he has to go to the committee to give data of one subject. So how should I, or his community plan this? Because I thought, I think I'm sure some people also find it really awkward as to how can he inform me that I cannot try data from one individual family.
So I think you hit the nail on the head. We have the plan. And so the more we think about this in advance and write into the protocol how we're going to engage our participants, what we can and cannot share, because clearly there are risks associated with sharing data in cases. You know, we don't want to mislead participants. In many, if not most trials, we have exploratory investigational outcomes even. And so to share that information, it's hard to be able to put a context around what that means for the patient and their family. So I think that we have to do this with extreme caution. But the more we think about it in advance, and the more the protocol addresses what can and cannot be shared, the better we are. And unfortunately, there is a harsh reality that sometimes we have to say to patients and families, I'm sorry, I cannot tell you that information. Or a better case scenario might be, I can't tell you that information until the trial is complete.
Another sort of related thing is that in multi-center trials, if you want to send letters to all the trial participants, a lot of times at the clinical coordinating center or the data coordinating center, you may not have the identifying information because that's maintained at the sites. So that's one thing that you have to sort of think strategically about. If you have a trial newsletter that you want to have go out, depending on how you've written things in the more traditional way, you wouldn't have access to that sort of information unless people sort of opted in for some sort of sharing. Obviously, by the time your trial is started, you're like, ooh, we should be sending out a trial newsletter. You're going back to amend all the IRBs so that people can sort of click and opt in is going to be hard. But thinking about those sort of things in advance in terms of, you know, is it something that each of the sites sends out? Because the sites obviously know the patient's identity, they can get in contact with them, and sometimes the central data center doesn't know. So it's one of those things, if you think about those things in advance, they can be implemented. If your trial is up and running, you're like, oh, retention's going badly, let's do a newsletter. And then you're like, oh, let's not do 100 amendments to 100 IRBs. Oh, crap. The next trial we do, we should definitely have a newsletter.
Of course,
And that's absolutely true. The central IRB will help. I mean, there's a little bit of an irony in that people from the data coordinating center, the central coordinating center, or the clinical coordinating center will go in and look at your chart, right? Like to verify the information, and that's what it's up for. But they can't send you like they can't look up your address and send you here's what's going on in the study. So you have to think about what you would want if you were in that study and write those things in. And I think people are going to, people would like to know what's going on with it. The data data question is interesting. I mean, in terms of sometimes sites can access their own data from their own participants, and they have capacity to share that. At least, I mean, they wouldn't know the code as to what the patient is assigned to potentially in a randomized trial. And it's sometimes hard to, you write in, after your trial completion is complete, we won't maintain contact with you, and then they're like, oh, but I want the data. So it's all complicated, and I think it's an active area to try to do what's best for people.
Any tips on recruitment for patients to a trial where intervention is something really
You and I are both thinking about that a lot right now. So I think, so Richard's question is, when you're trying to recruit to a trial for an intervention that's widely available, so